The White House reported President Trump signed an executive order that, according to Reuters News, directed government agency chiefs to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion policies at federal agencies, federal contractors, and in the private sector, rolling back federal policies that have existed since at least 1965. While history is not always a good barometer of what can happen in the present, it is a way for us to see similarities and what we can learn from them. Just over 100 years ago, a new president, Woodrow Wilson, was sworn in. He loaded his cabinet positions with devout segregationists and defended segregation on the basis of science. He pushed the lost cause narrative, and in his book, History of the American People, he wrote that whites were losing their rights and that liberals were trying to, quote, overthrow civilization because they wanted to have blacks equal to whites in the South. He then went on to say, quote, the white men were aroused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. Wilson was no fan of Reconstruction. He felt it displayed, quote, congressional despotism, with a disregard for state rights, and in particular, he was opposed to African Americans voting. He believed Congress's idealism was reckless and a, quote, blatant disregard of the childlike state of the Negro and the natural order of life, and threatened our very democracy. In light of Trump's executive order, I thought it was prudent for us to look back at what Wilson did when he took office. First was his appointment of staunch segregationists. Most notably were Albert P. Burleson, the Postmaster General, who supported institutionalized segregation. James Clark McReynolds, his Attorney General, was a well-known bigot, and Josephus Daniels, one of the leaders of the Wilmington Massacre, the only successful coup in the United States. This is an incredibly striking parallel to the recent pardoning of those who attacked police on January 6, along with the insurrectionist leaders themselves. So, how did this impact the federal bureaucracy? Well, first, Wilson allowed cabinet secretaries to segregate their departments. In effect, the federal government became a segregated workplace. Since Reconstruction, working for the federal government was one of the few paths African Americans had to achieve a modicum of economic success. These jobs were mostly as federal civil servants in the Department of Treasury and the Postal Service. Well, needless to say, discriminatory hiring practices increased. The Civil Service Commission required applicants to include a photograph with their application under the guise of preventing applicant fraud. The photos were a solution to a problem that didn't exist and was used merely to ensure black applicants wouldn't be hired. This would not be a diversified workforce, and as it was now segregated, inside the offices, inclusion was off the table as well. In fact, some offices didn't even bother creating segregated restrooms, so they didn't have to hire African Americans, and it clearly made work so unbearable for those that worked there that many quit, or reasons were found for them to be fired. On the campaign trail in 1912, Wilson projected an air of concern for the African American community and that he was for all Americans. And many black activists believed him, including W.E.B. Du Bois, who campaigned for him because he, like many others, felt the previous administration and party had abandoned them. However, once he took office, it became abundantly clear what Wilson's true agenda actually was. Again, while not a bellwether for things to come, the recent executive order and other actions this early into the second Trump administration are echoes of the past we definitely do not want to repeat.